Hey class, Kristen here. We are looking at Adobe Premiere Pro today. When you launch Premiere, you will see this window or something like it. Let's start a new project. I'll call this Premiere. Am I spelling that right? Premiere Demo. Always a good idea to include the date in your file names. Let's save it to a handy place. I will save this to my work folder. And let's leave these options as is for now. Click OK. Here we have a brand new Premiere project. We have our source monitor, our program monitor, our timeline, and our project panel. If we double click on the project panel, that will automatically open up the import window. Or you can come up to File, Import. So let's bring in some of our media. I'm going to bring in some of my animated clips and an audio track. And just so you know, there's an options button here where someday we'll be able to import an image sequence. So imagine your Dragon Frame high resolution photos. You'll be able to import them through this option. But for now, let's just import this entire folder with video clips and an audio track. And here we have it. I prefer this view, this list view, but as you can see down here, there are many other views that you can look at. Folders in Premiere Pro are called bins, and this refers to in the old analog days of cutting film. You would have strips and strips and rolls of film. You would cut out the strips that you want, and then you'd hang them up by their little sprockets over these large, literally like trash cans or bins. That's how you would organize them manually before splicing them together. So anyway, bin is a leftover name from that, and it's essentially it's just a folder. So here we have our media folder, and in our panel here, we can come back to our project window. All right, now we've got our media imported. If I double click, it will open in the source window, and now I can scrub through and see what my clip is and see what I'm working with. So the source monitor lets you preview whatever media you've brought in. Here's my audio track. It's a .wav file. And it was recorded with no attention paid to the levels, and so you can see it's pretty maxed out, but that's all right. Also, I just want to turn your attention to some of these columns here. Frame rate is always a good column to be double checking. For this class, we work in 24 frames per second, so this is a great way to double check that any animation media that you're importing into Premiere is coming in at 24 frames per second. We can take this slider and you can go through and you can see here's some other helpful columns, more important for live action video editing, but just so you know it's there. Something that's also helpful is being able to add descriptions to this description column or even a log note. For instance, if this was take 1, then I can just label that for myself, take 2. So I'm just typing that in right into this column. This is more helpful when you're dealing with many, many clips, but it's good to know that it's there. Okay, so we've got our media, we've imported it. Let's create a sequence so that we can start cutting clips and doing our editing, creating our program. So to make a new sequence, you can go to this icon down here, new item, sequence. or File, New, Sequence. Let's use this icon here. Also, just so you know, right next to it is to create a new bin. You can make a new folder. So why don't we do that and just call this sequences, because we'll have different versions of the sequences. New item, new sequence. Now, this is important. Let's always make sure we're at the settings that we need. Again, for this class, we have specific settings. So the best way to do that is to come into this settings tab and scroll up until you can see custom. And then here, we're going to change everything to 24 frames per second. We'll make sure this is 1920 by 1080, 16 by 9 aspect ratio. We want to make sure that the pixel shape, the pixel aspect ratio is 1:1, meaning a square. We want this to be progressive and not interlaced. This is just reconfirming 24 frames per second. We can leave the color space as is, and we can leave the audio as is. Again, just double check that your video preview is also going to be 1920 by 1080, and we can leave everything else the same. While we're here, we might as well name our sequence. So we'll just call this demo cut 1, and then the date, and then hit OK. Now, if I double click this icon, you'll see it'll show up in my timeline. And now we have a sequence. Let's start cutting into our sequence. I'm going to take my animation and let's say that I only want to take this first moment. So we're going to add an in and out point. That means we're going to set the specific area and time frame that we want to trim. So I'm going to hit I for in and O for out. And then there's several ways that we can drag this into the timeline. First way is to just physically drag it. To zoom in, I'm going to press plus and minus, or equals and minus on the keyboard will let me zoom in and out of my timeline. So we can physically drag this clip. We can also use these buttons down here. Let's try this. Now you see this is an insert edit, and so it scooted the clip that I had pre-existing in my timeline, it scooted it down. We can also drag it, and we get a few options here as well. Let's try insert after. So that's at least 3 ways right now that we can cut this clip in. Spacebar means to play, and I have cut this clip in 3 times. Okay, so there's 3 ways that you can bring something, you can cut something from your source monitor into your timeline. Finally, the 4th way is by using and memorizing these hotkeys. So let me demonstrate. If we're in the middle here and I want to insert and edit, then I will press the comma. Insert, again, that just means it will scoot everything down and make room for what you're inserting. As compared to, let's say, let me move the out point here, an overwrite edit, that's going to be period on the keyboard. You can see it just pasted everything on top of what was previously there. It did not push the clips further down. So an overwrite edit is going to be period, and an insert edit is going to be comma. So those are your 2 basic editing tools, the insert edit and the overwrite edit. You can, of course, also drag clips directly from your project window into the timeline. So let me drag both of these at once and bring them in. Now you can see one of my files was exported with an audio track even though it's blank. So here is our audio. I can resize the tracks here by dragging. And if you drag it up, you'll get a preview. With the arrow tool here, you can also just physically pick up clips, move them around your timeline. And if we move them up a track, we can start to layer videos. If you want to cut and fine-tune your edits in the timeline, then you can use one of these tools. The ripple edit looks like this yellow arrow, and you can see it kind of acts like an insert function. So it will take whatever length of the clip that I want to trim it to, and it will automatically move what comes after it and keep it lined up. Now, as opposed to a rolling edit, that looks like this red symbol with these two rollers. So if you select an edit point, it lets you move the timing of the edit while keeping the timing of your sequence in place. So rolling edit is great for fine-tuning moments, whereas the ripple edit is great for larger timing changes that you want to make. And finally, we have just this regular arrow, the selection tool. So that's this red arrow. And I can take that and I can also make trims with it and even create an opening where I might want to splice in another moment. So let me just create an in point in my timeline and an out point. I'm going to go back one frame, and I'm just using these up and down arrows in the timeline to go from cut to cut or edit to edit. And if I zoom in, if I put an out point here, you can see it's going to include the first frame of this clip, and I actually don't want that. So I'm going to take the left arrow, go back one, and then put my out point here. And now I don't clip off anything of the clip following it. A cool thing you can do is just cut in a moment to fill in this time that I've marked off with the in and out points. Let me zoom out there a little bit. So let's say I want this moment of the ball just before it lands. I'm going to make an in point here. And then I want to overwrite this space. So I'm going to hit the period. And I overwrote just in the exact space that I highlighted, starting at the exact frame that I wanted. Again, spacebar lets you play back. Now, let's quickly talk about some audio. Now, we can treat audio the same way. Double click that to show it in the source monitor, and I'll find a little clip here. I'm going to say I for in, and I'll play it down, and I'm going to I just want this section here in my sequence. So once I have this selected and I have my time marker at the beginning, I can just press period to overwrite the audio track. And there we go. Now I have audio in my sequence. Okay, so let's say I'm going to trim, I want to cut this off. So I can use this razor blade tool and click right here, and then I can get my arrow tool, which is V, and then select and delete the extras. Okay, now let's say we want to lower the volume a little bit. If you pull down the track to make it wider, you'll see this little line show up. This is how we can change the volume. This line represents the volume. I'm going to play this. Watch what happens to these UV meters. Let me turn this off. All right. Okay. Because when I was recording this audio, I was not recording it with the proper levels. It's coming in way too hot in Premiere. So we can lower that easily by just clicking on this line and pulling it down. You can see it's a decibel counter, and this is one way that you can roughly adjust the volume. Now, those of you who have taken sound image before, you know better than to record your audio so hot and not even check your levels. So please continue those good practices. Now, if you hit P to get this pen tool, you can create keyframes on your volume, and you can kind of manually um, create these fade ins, fade outs. See, even in the midst of the track, just by adding more points, click and drag, and you can adjust the volume like this. Oops. So you can fade out by making 2 points and then just dragging one all the way down to infinity. Here's what it sounds like. I'm going to hold shift and that will keep my audio mark at the level that I want. Okay, great. Okay. I can also use the arrow tool. This needs to be lowered. Okay. So ideally, you want your meters to be peaking right around this area in the -3 to -6 zone. If it turns red, then that's too loud, and when I screen your film in class, it's going to kill all of our ears. So make sure your levels coming out of Premiere are going to be within this -3 to -6 range. Okay. Now, you can right click and you get a little menu that pops up. And you can also apply a default transition. If you do that on the audio track, you'll automatically get a fade out. So let's remove this little point that I made. Let me just delete that. Okay. And now I have this transition effect. I can change the duration. Say instead of 1 second, I just want it to be half a second. So this is frames. So let's say 12 frames. That means half a second. And then let's hear it. Yeah, so that's a much quicker fade out. We can do the same. We can add quick transitions to our video tracks. So again, I'm going to select the end of this clip. I'm going to right click and apply default transition. And right now my default transitions are set to cross dissolve. So what that means is you can quickly add a fade out on your video as well. And you can do this on cuts between two clips. So I'm going to select this, right click, apply default transition, and it's going to cross dissolve between these two clips. So it's taking my ball, the pink ball clip, and it's extending it so that it can cross dissolve over this blue scribble coming on. Now, if I double click this, I can also change the length, the duration of that effect. And if I use one of these editing tools, I can also keep that effect on while I adjust and readjust timing. So N is the shortcut for this. And I might need to lock down my audio layers so that I can move this over. Oh, it's because my blue clip, this is the first frame of the blue clip, so I can only move it into the clip. And let's apply this again. There. And now we have a dissolve that's more centered. If we double click one of these clips, it will open it in the source monitor also, but more importantly, we will be able to add changes to it in the Effect Controls panel. You'll see some familiar looking icons here: position, scale, rotation, anchor. All of these have a stopwatch next to it, so you can quickly add keyframes on top of your video clips just as you would in After Effects. If you want, you can select this attribute and then you can drag the clip around in your program monitor, or you can scrub one of these coordinates and line up your animation that way. I'll use these little triangles to navigate between any keyframes that I'm dropping here. And I can scrub through it here. Here we've got some blend modes as well, similar to Photoshop and After Effects. Let's add some titles now. We'll take this tool, the Type tool, and let's draw in the box that we want to be able to type in. Now, this automatically created a new element in our timeline. Let's see what happens. This is a title. Okay, so because I took that type tool and I drew a box already, this gives me a great way to keep everything in this little border, this bounding box. Now, if I select this, you might have already noticed in my Effect Controls panel, I have a bunch more options. If we go into the Graphics part and twirl down Text, if I select the text, then I can change the color. And you can see anywhere you see the stopwatch, that means you can add animation keyframes to those attributes. My stylus is too sensitive. There we go. Okay, so let's just quickly add some keyframes. Now, if I want to match where this timing is, the easiest way to do that is to just use this button. Go to the next keyframe, and then I can add one here. So the graphics refers to just the text, whereas the video refers to this entire clip. I'm going to remove these keyframes. Okay, let's quickly add some transitions here. I can add a default one, or we can go and look at the transitions available. Go to, let's see, effects. That's going to be already here. And here you've got video effects, similar to in After Effects when you were playing around. And here is our transitions. So we can try one of these cheesy ones. Just drag it over. It'll replace whatever I have. There we go. Whenever you double click something in the timeline, let's cancel this. Whenever you double click something in the timeline, it will open it up either in the source monitor, which will give you access to its attributes in the effects controls. So same with transitions. Let's leave this duration the way it is. And you get a few options to play with, even with your transitions. All right, let's save and export. So what's handy is that in Adobe, it'll show you with a little star that it needs to be saved. So you can always look at that and quickly press Command S or go up to File, Save, Save As, or Save a Copy to save your work. And then we can export. Let's go back to our project window. And just to be safe, we want to select the sequence that we want to export. Go up to File, Export, Media. And this should feel familiar. We want, for this class, again, purposes for this class, we want a QuickTime movie. And we want Apple ProRes 422 HQ. Now make sure your audio is checked as well as your video. You can definitely export them separately, but we want both. You can double check your settings here. And then click on this link to make sure it's going to be saved to the place that you want it. And I'm going to make a folder here for exports. Over the course of a project, you might have several versions of exports as well. So that's why I just like to make a folder for it here. This is the media that I imported. Here's an autosave folder, so Premiere is autosaving in the background in case it crashes. You don't lose too much of your work. This should be a default setting in your Premiere Pro preferences. And then here is my Premiere project, and of course my exports folder. So you can create a new folder from this window, and then just double check. This is what we want, .mov. And here is, let's change the name of that. So according to our class, and save. And we can send this to Adobe Media Encoder to queue it up and render it out in the background while we keep working, or we can just export this now. It was exported successfully. Great. Let's open it. And here we have my beautiful sequence, edited sequence.